But actual measurement of a degree of longitude in Australia or some other land far south of the equator can alone place this matter beyond dispute. The problem to be solved might be given as the following. A degree of longitude in England at the latitude of 50 degrees north is 38 degrees 57 minutes nautical, or 45 statute miles at the latitude of Port Jackson in Australia, which is 45 degrees south. A degree of longitude, if the Earth is a globe, should be 45 minutes nautical, or 52 statute miles. But if the Earth is a plane, and the distances above referred to as given by nautical men are correct, a degree of longitude on the parallel of Port Jackson will be 69 hours 44 statute miles, will be 69:44 statute miles, being a difference of 19:92, or nearly 20 statute miles. In other words, a degree of longitude along the southern part of Australia ought to be, if the Earth is a plane, nearly 20 miles greater than a degree of longitude on the southern coast of England. This is the point which has yet to be settled. The day is surely not far distant when the scientific world will demand that the question be decided by proper geodetical operations, and this not altogether for the sake of determining the true figure of the Earth, but also for the purpose of ascertaining, if possible, the cause of the many anomalies observed in navigating the southern region. These anomalies have led to the loss of many vessels, and the sacrifice of a fearful amount of life and property. Quote, in the southern hemisphere, navigators to India have often fancied themselves east of the Cape, when still west, and have been driven ashore on the African coast, which, according to their reckoning, lay behind them. This misfortune happened to a fine frigate, the Challenger, in 1845. Assuredly, there are many shipwrecks from alleged errors in reckoning, which may arise from somewhat a false idea of the general form and measurement of the Earth's surface. Such a subject, therefore, ought to be candidly and boldly discussed. These are quotes from Tore Through Creation by the Reverend Thomas Milner, and The Builder, September 20th, 1862, in a review of a recently published work on astronomy. It is commonly believed that surveyors, when laying out railways and canals, are obliged to allow 8 inches per mile for the Earth's curvature, and that if this were not done in the latter case, that the water could not be stationary, but would flow on until the end of 1 mile in each direction. Although the canal should have the same depth throughout, the surface would stand 8 inches higher in the middle than at the ends. In other words, that the bottom of a canal, in which the allowance of 8 inches per mile had not been made, would be a chord to the surface of the contained water, which would be an arc of a circle. To this it is replied that both in regard to railways and canals, wherever an allowance has been attempted, the work has not been satisfactory, and is so irregular where the results in the earlier days of railway, canal, and other surveying, that the most eminent engineers abandoned the practice of the old forward leveling in allowing for convexivity, and adopted what is now called the double sight, or back and foresight method. It was considered that whether the surface were convex or horizontal, or whether the convexity were more or less than the supposed degree, would be of no consequence in practice if the spirit level or theodolite were employed to read both backwards and forwards for whatever degree of convexivity existed. One, quote, sight would compensate for the other, and if the surface were horizontal, the same mode of leveling would apply. So important did the Ordnance Department of the government consider this matter that it was deemed necessary to make the abandonment of all ideas of rotundity compulsory, and in a standing order number 6 of the House of Lords, as to the preparation of sections for railways, etc., the following language is used. Quote, that the section be drawn to the same horizontal scale as the plan, and to a vertical scale of not less than 1 inch to every 100 feet, and shall show the surface of the ground marked upon the plan, the intended level of the proposed work, the height of every embankment, and the depth of every cutting, and a datum horizontal line which shall be the same throughout the whole length of the work, or any branch thereof respectively, and shall be referred to some fixed point stated in writing on the section near some portion of such work. And in the case of a canal, cut, navigation, turnpike, or other carriage road or railway near either of the termini. End quote. Number 44 of the Standing Orders of the House of Commons is similar to the above, number 6, of the House of Lords. Thus it is evident that the doctrine of the earth's rotundity cannot be mixed up with the practical operations of civil engineers and surveyors, and to prevent the waste of time and the destruction of property which necessarily followed the doings of some who were determined to involve the convexity of the earth's surface into their calculations, the very government of the country that has been obliged to interfere. Every surveyor of this and other countries, whether ordnance or otherwise, is now carried out in connection with a horizontal datum, and therefore has no other method proves satisfactory. It is virtually an admission by all the most practical scientific men of the day that Earth cannot be other than a plane. An argument for the Earth's convexity is thought by many to be found in the following facts. Quote, fluid or semi-fluid substances in a state of motion invariably assume the globular form, as rain, hail, dew, mercury, and melted lead, which poured from a great height becomes divided into spherical masses, as in the manufacture of small shot, etc. End quote. Quote, there is an abundant evidence from geology that the Earth has been a fluid or semi-fluid mass, and it could not, therefore, continue in a state of motion through space without becoming spherical. End quote. Without denying that the Earth has been, at some former period, in a pulpy or semi-fluid state, it is requisite to prove beyond all doubt that it has a motion upon axis and through space, or the conclusion that it is therefore spherical is premature and illogical. It will be shown in a subsequent part of this work that such axial and orbital motion does not exist, and therefore any argument founded upon and including it as a fact is necessarily fallacious. In addition to this, it may be remarked that the tendency in falling fluids to become globular is owing to what has been called attraction of cohesion, not attraction of gravitation. What is very limited in its operation, it is confined to small quantities of matter. If in the manufacture of a small shot, the melted metal is allowed to fall in masses of several ounces or pounds, instead of being divided into particles only weighing a few grains, it will never take a spherical form, and shot of an inch in diameter could not be made by this process. Bullets of even half an inch diameter can only be made by casting the metal into spherical molds. In tropical countries, the rain, instead of falling in drops or small globules, often comes down in large irregular masses which have no approximation whatever to sphericity, so that it is manifestly unjust to affirm of large masses of matter like the earth that which only belongs to minute portions or a few grains in weight. The whole matter, taken together entirely, fails as an argument for the earth's rotundity. Those who hold that the earth is a globe will often affirm, with visible enthusiasm, that in an eclipse of the moon there is proof positive of rotundity, that the shadow of the earth upon the moon is always round, and that nothing but a globe could in all positions cast a circular shadow. Here again the essential requirements of an argument are wanting. It is not proved that the moon is eclipsed by a shadow. It is not proved that the earth moves in an orbit, and therefore takes different positions. It is not proved that the moon recedes her light from the sun, and that therefore her surface is darkened by the earth intercepting the sun's light. It will be shown in the proper place that the earth has no motion in space or on axis, that it is not a shadow which eclipses the moon, that the moon is not a reflector of the sun's light, but is self-luminous, and therefore could not possibly be obscured by a shadow from any object whatsoever. The subject is only introduced here because it forms one of the category of supposed evidence of the earth's rotundity. But to call that an argument where every necessary proposition is assumed is to stultify both the judgment and the reasoning powers. Many place great reliance upon what is called the spherical excess, observed in leveling, as a proof of the Earth's rotundity. In Cassell's treatise on leveling, it is stated that, quote, the angles taken between any 3 points on the surface of the Earth by the theodolite are, strictly speaking, spherical angles, and their sum must exceed 180 degrees, and the lines bounding them are not the chords as they should be, but the tangents to the Earth. This excess is inappreciable in common cases, but in the larger triangles it becomes necessary to allow for it, and to diminish each of the angles of the observed triangle by 1/3 of the spherical excess. To calculate this excess, divide the area of the triangle in feet by the radius of the Earth in seconds, and the quotient is the excess. End quote. The following observation is made by surveyors, also bears upon the subject. If a spirit level or theodolite be, quote, leveled, and a given point be read upon a graduated staff at the distance of about or more than 100 chains, this point will have an altitude slightly in excess of the altitude of the crosshair of the theodolite. And if the theodolite be removed to the position of the graduated staff, and again leveled, and backward sight taken at the distance of 100 chains, another excess of altitude will be observed, and this excess will go on increasing as often as the experiment or backward and forward observation is repeated. From this it is argued that the line of sight from the spirit level, or theodolite, is a tangent, and that the surface of the Earth is therefore spherical. Of a similar character is the following observation. If a theodolite or spirit level be placed upon the seashore and, quote, leveled, end quote, and directed towards the sea, the line of the horizon will be observed to be a given amount below the crosshair of the instrument, to which a certain dip or inclination from the level will have to be given to bring the crosshair and the sea horizon together. It is concluded that as the sea horizon is always observed to be below the crosshair of the leveled theodolite, the line of sight is a tangent, the surface of the water convex, and therefore the Earth is a globe. The conclusion derived from the last 3 observations is exceedingly plausible, and would completely satisfy the minds of scientific men as to the Earth's sphericity, if a perfect explanation could not be given. The whole matter has been specially and carefully examined, and one very simple experiment will show that the effects observed do not arise from rotundity in the Earth's surface, but from a certain peculiarity in the instruments employed. Take a convex lens or a magnifying glass and hold it over a straight line, drawn across a sheet of paper. If the glass be held so that a part of the straight line can be seen through it, and another part seen outside it, the difference in the direction of the line will be observed, as shown in the diagram figure 25. Let ABC represent the straight line. If a lens is now held an inch or more, according to its focal length, over the part of the line AB, and the slightest amount of its center, that part of the line AB which passes under the lens, will be seen in the direction of the figures 1, 2. But if the lens be now moved a little out of its central position in the opposite direction, the line BC will be observed at 3, 4, or below BC. A lens is a magnifying glass because it dilates or spreads out from its center the objects observed through it. Therefore, whatever is magnified by it is seen a little out of its axis or center. This is, again, necessitated by the fact that the axis or actual center is always occupied by the crosshair. Thus, the line of sight in the theodolite or spirit level, not being axial or absolutely central, reads upon a graduated staff a position which is necessarily slightly divergent from the axis of vision, and this is the source of that spherical excess, which has so long been considered by surveyors as an important part of the Earth's rotundity. In this instance, as indeed in all others given as evidence that the Earth is a globe, the premises do not fully warrant the conclusion which is premature, drawn before the whole subject is fairly examined, and when other causes are simply sufficient to explain the effects observed. These anomalies have led to the loss of many vessels and the sacrifice of a fearful amount of life and property. Quote, in the southern hemisphere, navigators to India have often fancied themselves east of the Cape when still west, and have been driven ashore on the African coast, which, according to their reckoning, lay behind them. This misfortune happened to a fine frigate, the Challenger, in 1845. Assuredly, there are many shipwrecks from alleged errors in reckoning which may arise from somewhat a false idea of ought to be, if the earth is a plane, nearly 20 miles greater than a degree of longitude on the southern coast of England. This is the point which has yet to be settled. The day is surely not far distant when the scientific world will demand that the question be decided by proper geodetical operations, and this not altogether for the sake of determining the true figure of the earth, but also for the purpose of ascertaining, if possible, the cause of the many anomalies observed in navigating the southern region. But actual measurement of a degree of longitude in Australia or some other land far south of the equator can alone place this matter beyond dispute. The problem to be solved might be given as the following. A degree of longitude in England at the latitude of 50 degrees north is 38 degrees 57 minutes nautical, or 45 statute miles at the latitude of Port Jackson in Australia, which is 45 degrees south, a degree of longitude, if the earth is a globe, should the general form and measurement of the earth's surface. Such a subject, therefore, ought to be candidly and boldly discussed. These are quotes from Tour Through Creation by the Reverend Thomas Milner, and The Builder, September 20th, 1862, in a review of a recently published work on astronomy. It is commonly believed that surveyors, when laying out railways and canals, are obliged to allow 8 inches per mile for the Earth's curvature, and that if this were not done in the latter case, be 45 minutes nautical, or 52 statute miles. But if the Earth is a plane, and the distances above referred to as given by nautical men are correct, a degree of longitude on the parallel of Port Jackson will be 69 hours 44 statute miles, will be 69:44 statute miles, being a difference of 19:92, or nearly 20 statute miles. In other words, a degree of longitude along the southern part of Australia